Greetings everyone, my name is Jimmy Linville with 4L Irrigation in Keller, Texas. We get a lot of calls about coverage, and usually the conversation goes something like, hey, I know my sprinklers are working because I see they're working, but I have dead spots in my grass. And sometimes people will say, I can even see it going in a stream, but it all goes to the end of the stream. There's not any water getting in between where the sprinkler is and the other areas of my grass. So a lot of times we do what we call a catchment system to actually test that. And that's kind of the test that we ran today. These cups that you see up here have little stakes that we'll put them in different parts of the zone. And then we'll run the zone and we'll compare the water. And if the water is the same across that zone, then we can rule out coverage. Now, there still may be issues with sunlight versus shade, pests, bugs, soil, minerals, things of that nature. There can still be a lot of difference in what is causing one area to grow versus another, but we can rule out coverage. So when we're talking about coverage, we really want to talk about match precipitation. We want the same amount of water going everywhere in that zone so that it gets equal amount of water. If that happens, we can always turn the controller up to get even coverage everywhere, or we can turn it down. But if we have spotty coverage, then we can't do that. So what do we need for match precipitation? Well, number one, we need pressure. So I always advise people, don't water when you're doing the shower, when you're doing the dishwasher, the washing machine, because your house and your irrigation system is going to fight for that pressure, and both are going to lose. Each of the heads that we talk about have a certain pressure rate that they work optimally in. And if your system has been designed around that, and then you're running the washing machine at the same time, it's going to suffer. So that's the biggest thing that you can do in regards to pressure. If you have too much pressure, you can do pressure regulator on your system. You can do pressure regulating heads, which is a much cheaper scenario. But usually it's not the scenario of too much pressure. It's usually not enough that causes a lack of coverage. The second thing we need to talk about is nozzles, because I know a lot of clients will go to whatever big box store they go to, Home Depot, Lowe's, and they'll go and they'll buy a 4-inch pop-up, or they'll buy a rotor to replace the one that they have in the ground. And this is where it gets important, and this is where you can lose a lot of coverage on these scenarios. So what we've done is I put a valve in my yard for one head a couple of years ago because I had one area that wasn't getting enough water, and I didn't want to add a head to an existing zone. So it worked out perfectly for this scenario. So we have one head on a whole zone so that we're keeping pressure the same all the time. We're not turning any water on in the house or anything of that nature, and we're trying to get the steady pressure. Now, it is a little bit windy today, so that might have impacted our test a little bit. But what we did is we put out spray heads, rotators, and a rotor to see what the difference is. The biggest thing that you need to take away is you can't mix those. So for instance, we ran 2 rotors. And this one had a 1 gallon a minute. And you can see that the water is coming up to right about 5 on my measurement. And you can see this one has 3 times as much. And that's because we ran it with a larger nozzle in it. When you buy a rotor, you will either get a nozzle tree like this, and these vary from 1 to 8 gallons per minute on them. Or you'll get one that already has a nozzle in it. Many times they'll come with a 3 standard. But you want to make sure that you get the proper nozzle for your property. So if you're putting a big rotor in and it's in the corner, it needs to be 25% of what you would put in the middle of your yard. So if you have a rotor in the middle of your yard that's going 360, and on that same zone you have one in the corner of your yard that is only doing a 90 degree, if this one is 4 in the center of your yard, you want to make sure that the corner one is 1 gallon per minute if you want match precipitation. If you just put an 8 gallon a minute on the corner, that one's going to get a whole lot more water than the other areas of your yard. So you are going to have to do a little bit of math there and make sure that you put it in correctly. Then we ran a spray head. And again, usually what you see, and this is what most are familiar with in the yard, this is a 4-inch pop-up. And so we ran 10 minutes, exactly the same. And on this one, this is a 10 half that we ran on this one. This is a 15 half that we ran. So you could see if you needed a 15 half, and you went to the store and you bought a 10 half, and I'm talking about the circumference of the nozzle, right? And the throw on them. Then you would be, and everything else had a 15 on that zone, and you put a 10 in, you're going to be shorting that area of water. And then the last one that we looked at was, again, these are called rotators. These are kind of a mix in between a rotor and a spray head, and they go right on the spray head bodies. And on this one we put an MP3000, and on this one we put an MP1000. And again, you can see the difference in the amount of water that they put out. Not only are they putting out a different amount of water, but their throw is going to be a whole lot different. This one is throwing 30 feet, and this one's only going out about 10 feet. So again, a big difference. Make sure that you have the right nozzle for the place that you have in your yard. The other thing to keep in mind is this head-to-head, and this is going to be the last thing we talk about. If I have a nozzle right here, or a head right here, and a head right here, if your house was built 20 or 30 years ago, they probably built it where it went right in about the middle, and it was covering this. And the problem areas seem to always be in here, because if this one fell short, then obviously this area is going to be short. If it fell long, and both of them fell long, then this area is going to be greener than the other parts of the yard. So in today's scenario, what they would do, instead of having those two, they would have one here, and one here. And this one needs to come all the way over and touch this one. So if they're 10 feet apart, I need a 10-foot nozzle. And this one needs to come all the way and touch this one. And then it reciprocates. This one comes all the way and touches here. This one comes all the way and touches here. Now, if these are 15 feet and I put a 10-foot nozzle here, then there's 5 feet here that's not going to hit. And in that scenario, this amount of the yard is going to be shortchanged. So when you're thinking about coverage in your yard, again, just make sure that you're running your system when no other drain is coming on the pressure of that system. So it's early in the morning, usually is the best time for that. Make sure that your nozzles match. You can't put, you could mix a rotator and a rotor. And you can see these were ran the same amount of time, and they're pretty close in coverage. So you could mix rotators and rotors, but you cannot mix spray heads and rotors. And again, if you look at this compared to the rotor that we have, you can see that this spray head is putting out a whole lot more water. The problem is this one, this rotor comes up and it shoots 30 feet and it constantly moves. This spray head, they both ran for exactly 10 minutes, but this spray head is only in a certain area and it sprays continually for the entire time that you run it in that one area. So if you were to mix these two, the area that had the sprinkler, the spray head on it versus the rotor on it, then you're going to have a scenario where the spray head is putting out much more water and you're probably going to have a greener scenario. The other thing, in times, if you want your rotors to get approximately the same amount of coverage that your spray heads are, you're going to need to run them and the rotators longer. If you're running this one 10 minutes, you're probably going to want to run this one 15 or 20 minutes to get the equal amount of coverage on those. So if you keep those things in mind, you make sure you have the right nozzle. You don't mix drip and spray heads and rotors and rotators all in the same zone. Other than the exception of the rotators and the rotor that you can probably get by with pretty closely matching those, the others will not work for you in that scenario. And then you need to make sure you have head-to-head coverage so that you're not shorting one part of that yard. And that's usually the areas that we see. So those are the things that we look at when we go look at someone who has coverage issues. and we can eliminate coverage issues, then we can say, okay, you can take water coverage off of your list. Now that doesn't mean it may be getting too much water or not enough water, but we know that it's an even precipitation matched in that zone, then everything else can be controlled by the controller. Thanks a lot. I hope you have a wonderful day, and thank you for taking your time and listening to us today.